What is going on, Barry fans, and welcome back to my channel, MovieFiles. We are back breaking down this fourth and final season of Barry, and we're talking about the 7th episode titled A Nice Meal. Now, in this episode, we might have just witnessed not only the funniest episode of the series, but definitely one of the darkest, and we also just might be watching the Barry Berkman movie without even knowing. More on that a little bit later in today's review, but first, I want to talk to y'all in the comments about this 7th episode. What did you love? What did you like? What did you hate about the episode? And of course, tell me what Easter eggs and deeper meanings did you all take away from what I think is a fantastic episode of Barry. But also, I want to talk to y'all because this is the last time we'll be sharing any predictions or theories before next week's finale, which breaks my heart to say that, but let's have some fun on this video and have some fun in the comment section. And of course, if you all appreciate today's breakdown, consider hitting that like button, sharing today's spoiler breakdown, and of course, consider subscribing to the channel. With all that being said, we got an episode to break down, full spoilers ahead. As we pick up from last week's moments of Barry being captured by Jim, as we hear Barry praying to God to give him courage and to watch over him and keeping John safe, as Jim gives Barry the best Batman meets Rorschach impression I've ever heard, as he says to Barry, "Oh, you're a man of God now. You think because you repented, you get to choose where you go after you die? You know where you're going and you're afraid. This is all in your head, Barry." I am so sorry for that terrible impression, but in all seriousness, the important line there that I thought was very important was, "It's all in your head, Barry." Is this show telling us that this is not even happening? This is all fake? We'll talk about that later, but we see Barry can't feel his arms and legs, and Jim tells him, "I cut them off." Yes, he cut his arms and legs off, and he wants Barry to experience his loved ones one last time as we get a shot of little John. Now, let me tell y'all something right now. Look, before it was revealed, number one, that his arms and legs are still attached to his body, but then we see Jim has Barry hooked up to some type of sensory device that channels your brain to locations that you're familiar with, as we see the land that Barry lives on with his family, but we also see that same beach where Barry's victims were in season 3, which might be some foreshadowing, but let me go back to it. I legit thought that Jim chopped off his arms and legs. This intro gave me complete chills. Let's talk about what's going on in Gene in this episode, and like I said last week, he has not changed one bit. As we see, he's created this article online for people to support not making the Barry movie, as the headline reads, "Don't let Warner Brothers exploit her death. Hashtag stop the Barry Berkman movie." We see Tom commends Gene for taking this honorable path, as Gene is committed to stopping this movie from happening. Now, this scene was just so funny to me because it's like a perfect example to me as far as today's society. We know that Gene had the energy last week to threaten Warner Brothers, taking him to court, but now that same energy has been applied to going behind a hashtag. That foot has been released off the pedal, and we see that, number one, in this scene, but we definitely see it's completely off the pedal. He's out of the car at that point by the end of the episode, but again, the society of it all, and listen, this is nothing against hashtags, because there are definitely some good hashtags out there that bring awareness to things, right? But I feel as though, as Gene, what he was doing last week, putting the pressure on these companies, putting the pressures on people that you think are doing harm, but you got to get your hands dirty. You can't just stand behind a hashtag. So I love how this scene kind of represents some of the stuff that we see in today's society. But we cut to Gene meditating as he gets a call from Matt. Now, Matt claims to be some big time agent, and he has a big client that wants to play him. Now, we see Gene initially is committed to, again, not supporting this movie at all, until he learns that that client is arguably one of the greatest actors of all time, that is Daniel Day-Lewis, and he is now interested in playing the Gene character. Now, you see immediately the whole killing this movie is slowly no longer on top of Gene's mind, and now, as I mentioned last week, these characters are not changed people from the last 8 years. Or maybe you can say this could be a product of them being back in LA and being in the Hollywood system, and it kind of clouts their judgment and takes away any remnants of them being good people. I'm more so believing they never changed, but also I know that Hollywood definitely has corrupted these characters. After Gene set up this meeting, he gets another surprise call, and it is from Sally, as they're both surprised that each one of them are still alive. And we know that Sally is surprised surprised that he's alive because we know that Barry's there to kill him. But I do want to mention, didn't Gene say to Leo that he had a brand new phone and he didn't have his old phone? I might be mistaken in that, but it also could be, if I am remembering that scene right, he might have kept his own phone because he wanted to keep all those Hollywood connects. Just kind of shows you that he had one foot in, one foot out. He wanted to try to live a new life, but like a lot of these characters, they can't change from their past. Let me know what you all think about that there. But we know that Sally has now traveled back to Los Angeles and she needs his help. Gene tells her that he can't miss this meeting, but he advises her to go to his house where they'll meet up later. Now, Sally's in full panic mode in this scene as she has no clue what to do with John. And this is just more proof, like I mentioned last week, that she has never spent this much solo time with her son without Barry being around and really has no idea how to be a mother. More on that a little bit later, but let's get to this meeting here, as Matt's got some good news for Gene that Mark Wahlberg wants to produce this movie, but also he wants to star in it and he wants to play Barry. But there's a catch. Mark doesn't want to be seen as a cop killer, and we see Gene now, once he heard that, completely abandons this new found happiness and his new peace, and the whole hashtag Stop the Barry movie is no longer a thing in his brain. But now this is a great way to get Janice's story out there, and Barry, this just blew my mind when he said this to Matt. Barry is a complicated guy and a sympathetic soul. Switch up between last scene of Gene not want to support this movie to now fully supporting this film is just absolutely insane to me. And listen, I love reading you all's comments and I try to respond to them as often as I can, but I've seen a lot of people hate the Sally character. She's the worst, she's the villain, and there's a little bit of truth in that. And I know none of you all are talking about the actual actress. You just don't like the Sally character, but I've always said all these people are terrible in this show, man. But Gene definitely bumped up a few spots for me in this episode after the remarks and try to get this movie in place. I was just absolutely thrown for a loop seeing Gene's attitude, but like I said last week, this man has not changed. But focusing a little bit here on these characters, and I'm talking about Barry and Gene, watching these characters jumping at the first opportunity to do what they love or do what some consider what they do best, right? Let's take a look at Barry, who was willing to leave his family that he loves and leave this newfound religion with God, all so he can kill again, and paralleling that to Gene, willing to break this journey of peace and happiness and rebuilding the relationships he's destroyed, but now he's throwing that back now that he has the opportunity to get back in the limelight. Which, speaking of the limelight, let's talk about my man NoHo Hank, who only meant office supplies. We see NoHo Hank is looking at the golden statue of Cristobal, which to me might be some type of tradition that NoHo Hank does whenever he's feeling down or lost, that he kind of comes to that looking for some type of guidance, because we know Cristobal was his support system. And as I said in last week's breakdown, we see Hank taking this meeting with 4 badass ultimate killers known as Phobos. We meet Francisco, we meet Constantine, Todd, and Hank's personal favorite, Isaac, who has 500 confirmed kills. No, I'm sorry, let me take that back. He has 501 if you ask Hank, and we see that they are tasked with killing Fuchs. End of day at mine, and we know Hank has a message for Fuchs, which is that it was Hank that had him killed. Now, I found this scene to be so hilarious, but more importantly, I just thought it was so funny how we see Hank taking the suggestions from his second in command, because it almost felt like this was something that Fuchs would have given Hank as far as advice back in season 1 and 2 when he was all in his ear about hiring people to kill his enemies. So I just thought it was just an interesting way to look at how far Hank has come, and he definitely kind of takes some cues from those earlier seasons from Fuchs. But unfortunately, Hank has underestimated the Raven and his men, as we learn that the group didn't even last an hour because the heads are sent back to Hank in a box, and we see that one of Hank's men suggests that they go to the house and they take out Fuchs, and the house doesn't really matter. Hank takes that as an idea that they take matters into their own hands, and man, that was one terrible idea. Which, speaking of Fuchs, this might be the funniest scene of this entire series. We have the scene being broken down here as his new girlfriend and her daughter are rightfully upset and disturbed after watching 4 men get beheaded, as we watched his men give suggestions on how to handle the situation if it ever happens again. Now, from taking them to lunch, as the title of this episode is, a nice meal, to it was a surprise attack and how can we react to this? And then the funniest reaction to me is when one of his guys say they should watch a movie, very loud movie, which by the way was Fast and Furious 6, which is even funnier because as I'm recording this and the weekend that this episode comes out, Fast 10 is now in theaters. So it adds another layer of how funny and how perfectly timed that joke was to wearing noise canceling headphones. Listen, I was in tears. This is such a perfect Bill Hader type of comedy beat in this show, Barry. I'm going to miss this show so much, but my goodness, that scene was hilarious. But as the ladies leave the Raven's nest, as we see the Raven looking at his men on the balcony, and Hank arrives with one single missile and an emphasis on the word miss. As Hank takes the shot and misses Wyatt left, I had to pause the episode at this point because I was laughing so loud. This is just such a perfect balance in this dark episode, but the humor was so well placed as Hank finds out that they only brought one because of budget cuts, and we see the Ravens men begin to shoot at them, leaving Hank's men dead, and they're being chased down. Now Hank is on the phone with Fuchs and he wants us to end the feud. He's falling down the bushes and down the hill. Now I don't know, going back to the Fast and Furious reference, I don't know who's luckier in this moment. Was it Hank being shot out by the Ravens men who are like stormtroopers? I don't know how they missed killing Hank at that moment. Or is it Dom Toretto? Who was luckier? Let me know. But I think Hank might get the last laugh after what happens in this episode, which we'll talk about. But Hank is being picked up by his second in command, his supporter, who finds him at Mrs. Phoebe's house, and Hank wants to enter the new phase, which is giving Fuchs whatever he wants. And we see the second in command says, well, we don't know where Barry is, as Hank tells him to go to Gene's house to pick up Gene. Which, speaking of Gene, let's talk about Sally at the house. She still has no plan in place, as we see that she's telling John that everything will be okay and that Barry and Gene are going to talk and they're going to be one big happy family again, as she is now fully in a full panic mode. She's in shock. She is breaking down and crying. And for a split second there, when she looked back at that police officer, I had a feeling that she was just going to leave John there and just walk away from the whole situation, which she didn't, but instead, she walks over to the police officer, and as she gets closer and closer, and I'm going to come in, future Elliot here, doing a quick edit. So as I'm editing this video, I want to come in and mention something in this scene here. And when she's walking up to the police officer, which turns out to be the ghost that's been haunting her all season, that biker, which by the way, is that biker really even there? Is it all in her head again? But let's just say that she saw a police officer, but it was the biker that she saw in the face, and her guilty conscience made him look like the biker because obviously it's haunting her. But she walks up to the biker slash cop and says, I want to turn myself in. Now, immediately I'm thinking, well, she's turning herself in because of the guilty conscience. She killed the biker. The body was disposed of due to Barry. But what if she had another crime that she was turning herself in? What if Barry and Sally kidnap John? What if they're not the actual biological parents, but instead they want this happy life? Barry finds his baby. That would explain why she's acting so weird and she doesn't act like a mother towards John, because that's not really her child. Am I thinking too much into it? Let me know in the comments, but enjoy the rest of the video. We see that this is the same biker that she killed back in season 3. This ghost is still haunting her, and even more haunting in the scene is when he takes off his glasses and his eyes is covered in blood. Again, this episode was just so excellent. But I do want to take a moment to talk about the Sally and the ghost situation, which also kudos to you all. This is why I love making these videos. I read the comments last week and I was confused about the scene with the guy in the mask and the truck coming through the building. Now, I knew it was all in her head, but you all helped me kind of put the pieces of the puzzle together, that the stuff that was going on in the other room was the same scene, or at least the same dialogue from when Sally was killing that biker. So I appreciate you all. But again, I want to talk about the Sally ghost thing. Now, y'all know I love this show, but I do have some criticisms. I feel as though the haunting of the ghost storyline could have had a little bit more depth to it, a little bit more layers, because of course we see him popping up through various episodes in the season, but there's really hasn't been a through line. It really hasn't been like an actual scene of her confronting her ghost, which To be fair, we still have one episode left for that scene to potentially happen, but so far it's just very shocking, and it's useful, but I just wish there was more depth with those particular scenes of her seeing that ghost. Let me know how y'all feel about that. But as she turns around, we see Hank men have arrived, and they take both Sally and John. Speaking of Sally and John, let's talk about Barry, who, let's take a backtrack and catch up to him from the beginning of this episode. We see that he's still hooked up to Jim's device, and he looks at John and he is crying uncontrollably. As Jim is watching him doing this, he's going through his tools that he's going to use on Barry to torture him like he's Jigsaw from Saw. We see Barry continues to go through these visions, and he comes across Gene, who's eating at a dinner table. He's apologizing to Gene, and he says he wished he would have never gave him money to fix things back in season 3. Now, of course, Jim hears this. He pulls out his journal. He has a little note there about the $250,000, and he starts to put this whole story together that it was Gene that hired Barry to kill Janice. Now, at this point in the episode, Barry kind of wakes up. He notices that Jim isn't there. He picks up the same knife that Jim was going to use on him to torture him, and then he breaks out of the chair. He frees himself. He cuts himself accidentally, and he's losing a ton of blood. He makes his way into the kitchen, and he passes out. Now, I don't know if Barry passing out is a matter of him cutting himself so deeply. Is it an after effect of whatever he was plugged into that got in his system? Or it could be, let's talk about this here for a second, because I think it is important to point out how careless Jim kind of was in the situation that, okay, you now think that Gene is the one behind it all. He's the mastermind, but you still want to have Barry secure. Like, why wasn't there more eyes or things to keep Barry there? So I find it very interesting that Jim, who seems to be a very calculated individual, was kind of careless about leaving a actual killer in his garage, which me think of this whole thing maybe possibly being in Barry's head. Could Barry, all the stuff we see him doing right now, could it be a part of the illusion, part of him being hooked up to the machine, or is this part of the Barry Berkman movie? Let's wrap up in this episode before we get into that topic. As we see Gene arriving to the meeting, and I thought for a hot second there that we were going to get a cameo from Marky Mark and Daniel Day-Lewis coming out of retirement, but no, that didn't happen. And I'm fine with that not happening because it would have overshadowed this episode. But instead, we have something that ties more to the narrative, and that is a room with Jim, Leo, the DA, and then the random police officer we've seen various times throughout this show. But Jim has one question for Gene, and that is, why did Barry give him $250,000? Now, it didn't matter what came out of Gene's mouth next because he was already committed to who he thinks is behind all this. Then he got even more proof when Leo said, well, Dad, you never did answer me when I asked you where you got the money from to buy the house. And again, Jim's like, case closed. We found our man. We have the DA saying, well, you know, you have Barry who would have did anything for Gene, and he comes up with the whole thing of, again, that it was Gene that hired Barry to kill Janice after she found the drug money in the theater back in season 1. Again, I'm just sitting here with my mouth on the ground, and we get one of the best compliments that Gene has ever gotten in the show, especially coming from someone like Jim.
Gene, you are a great actor.
I mean, listen, under different circumstances, Gene would have loved to have heard that, right? But I compare that line, Gene hearing that from someone, very similar to when Barry heard his son say that he loved him. It meant the same thing, right? But again, this is what I want to point at right now. What did it take for Gene to hear that he was a great actor? Just like, what did it take for Barry to hear from someone that he loved say that he loved him? At what cost? We know how many dead bodies Barry had to get to this point. We know what Gene had to do of escaping Hollywood, but then finding himself back into the Hollywood system, all to be called a great actor. But again, what had to happen for him to hear that? You can say the same thing about Hank. Everything he did to run LA, what did he have to do? He lost Cristobal. Then shining a light on Sally, running away from her dreams and her career to become a mother. But again, at what cost? All these characters have lied. Some of them have killed to chase their dreams, but their nightmares have found them in the worst possible time. let's wrap up the episode with our final scene as Hank has officially met Sally, but this is the first time that John has also met his mother because Hank pulls off her wig and calls her Sally in front of him. Now, notice how John is sitting there with, number one, the Coke that Hank got from Mrs. Phoebe that he didn't want to drink, but he is sitting there, he's kind of breathing heavily, but he's calm in this situation. And I want to bring that up because remember the first time we met John? It was in a fight. He was fighting that kid, and we know he has that rage in him, not only from his mother, but also from Barry. So I wouldn't be surprised if by next week in the finale, we see little John go full Lily on Hank in the finale. I have my fingers crossed that we're going to see that little man go crazy on some people. But speaking of rage, we cut over to Barry, who's finally woken up. He's hearing his phone ring. He answered. He's immediately apologizing to Sally for not answering the call. But he finds out it's not Sally on the other end. Instead, it's Hank, and he tells him he better meet him at the location he's going to text him if he wants to see his family again. My goodness, I just want to point out in the scene, number one, I love how Barry is so committed to this new identity that he has Emily in his phone instead of for Sally's name, but the rage and the camera angle as we saw Barry getting fueled up was just such a perfect way to end this episode. But I also wanted to point out and noticing in this scene, did you all notice that in the background, that same football game playing on the radio was the same game from the season 3 finale when Barry was set up by Gene and Jim? There's a part in my brain that I want to go back to that makes me feel that this is Barry. This is all made up in Barry's head and it's still under the machine of what's going on with Barry. Or this is where my kind of crazy theory comes out. Are we watching the Barry Berkman movie and all this stuff that we're seeing is maybe Barry is watching this from prison? Maybe we're going to fast forward to the finale next week and John is an adult and he's watching the actual movie? That is my last crazy theory that I have for you all because I don't think it's a coincidence that the whole Hollywood influence on this show and this episode in particular mentioning the actors being involved and the budget cuts. I don't know, y'all. That's my last crazy theory before the finale. But the more logical theory that I have for you all, if we're assuming that all this is taking place in real time, it's safe to assume that Hank will hire or blackmail Barry to kill Fuchs to get his family and do this whole exchange thing. And we might see Barry go full kill rage mode that we saw back in season 2. Will Gene get arrested? How will Fuchs play into the finale? I cannot wait to see how it all wraps up, which speaking of next week, which it is so sad to see this show come to an end, but I want to let you all know that next week's review, I will have it out no later than Tuesday. Reason being that I still can't believe that HBO has decided to put 2 of my favorite shows, have the finale next week, and next week's finale of not only Barry, but it is Succession, and the finale of Succession is an hour and 30 minutes. And if you all don't know, I host an after show when the episodes end, so I won't be able to fully cover Barry like I want to, so it's a little bit of a scheduling issue there. But again, I promise I will have a review out for the Barry finale, but it will be either late Monday evening or maybe Tuesday morning. So that's my thoughts on the episode, my crazy theories, my breakdown. Now it's time for y'all to go crazy in the comments. Let's talk about Easter eggs, deeper meanings. How'd you all interpretate certain scenes, favorite moments, least favorite moments, and of course, sharing your final predictions and theories before next week's finale. If you all are still here watching this video, do your boy a favor, put in the comments right now, hashtag Barry Berkman movie. You all are awesome. I really appreciate you all. I can't believe it's the finale of next week, but hey, we're going to have a full breakdown come next week. But again, thank you so much. Before you all leave the video, just a reminder that if you enjoyed today's content, make sure you're hitting a thumbs up, consider sharing this breakdown, but also consider subscribing to the channel, and don't forget to hit the notification bell. That way you all can stay up to date with all my daily content. You all are great. Hope you're staying safe. As you can see on the screen now, come and join the community. Check out all my reviews for Barry. Check out my most recent review, and we'll catch you all on the next breakdown.